You can earn a solid income and still feel broke before the next paycheck hits. Ignore it, and every raise gets swallowed. Ordinary bills feel heavier than they should, and work keeps too much control over your options. I'll show you the three forces behind that, the order to fix them, and the setup that makes your next payday feel like income instead of relief. A consumer protection report shows 29% of consumers overdrafted or paid an insufficient funds fee in the past year. That tells you thin cash gets expensive fast. It looks like a spending problem. Most of the time, it's pre-claimed income, bad bill timing, and no buffer stacked together. Look, this isn't financial advice. I'm showing you the facts and the setup so you can think for yourself. Start with the number that tells you whether your month is already spoken for. Your paycheck hits, and within hours, the money already has owners. If that's your month, stop treating it like a character flaw. You can be responsible, skilled, and employed, and still never get ahead because the structure is wrong before the spending even starts. Good income is relative. Most of the time, it just means your pay looks strong from the outside, especially to people who do not see your housing cost, insurance, debt minimums, childcare, and the rest of adult life. For this problem, only take-home pay matters. That's the money that actually lands in checking after tax, benefits, health insurance, retirement deductions, and payroll choices take their piece. And that number is often much smaller than the identity you built around your salary. A salary can look big on paper and turn into much less in checking after deductions finish taking their turn. Your landlord, your lender, and the utility company do not bill your gross pay. The villain here is pre-spent pay. Recurring commitments and short-term smoothing tools claim next month's cash before it arrives. So by payday, there isn't enough room left for everything it needs to cover. Fixed costs are the recurring expenses that are hard to shrink quickly. Variable spend is the part that can move this month. Most people spend all their energy squeezing the variable stuff while the fixed stuff sets the month. When shame takes over, people often attack the easiest visible category. That can mean groceries, takeout, or random treats, even when the real pressure is coming from quiet contracts and automatic pulls. A National Pulse survey shows 34% of adults lived in households where paying usual expenses was somewhat or very difficult in the last 7 days. So, looking okay on paper is not the same as being safe in real life. That's why work keeps too much control over your options. When liquid cash is thin, one delayed reimbursement, one sick day, one broken tire, or one slow week at work can turn into a crisis. But there's a catch. A good income does not help if most of your take-home is already promised before payday. The next move is not guilt. It's a test that tells you whether the month is weak before groceries, gas, or one normal weekend even begins. On payday, subtract rent, insurance, minimums, childcare, and the other non-negotiables first. That number is your required spend share. It's the part of take-home already spoken for by fixed bills, minimum debt payments, insurance, and essential recurring services, before optional spending even gets a vote. Do not use gross income. Gross income flatters the month. This problem lives in checking, so only the money that actually arrives counts. Your required spend share is required monthly bills divided by monthly take-home. Then look at what's left. The money left for food, gas, medicine, irregular costs, and anything fun is take-home minus required bills. A required spend share is not a personality test. It is a pressure gauge. It tells you whether the month begins with flexibility or with almost none. It also explains why dual-income households can still feel fragile. Two respectable paychecks do not help much if both are already assigned before the first weekend arrives. A labor spending release shows housing and transportation made up 50.4% of all household spending in 2024, which is why advice built around tiny cuts can feel insulting. When most of your take-home is locked by housing, transportation, debt, insurance, and services you actually use. The little categories are not the engine of the problem. Expensive cities make this worse because they raise the cost of simply existing, not just the cost of luxuries. Tracking tells you where money went. Required spend share tells you how much freedom the month never had in the first place. If the share is high, the next move is to lower recurring drag, change bill timing, or build enough cash that the month stops depending on credit. If your take-home is close to your required bills and the leftover is thin, one normal week can erase the margin without any reckless spending at all. That is not failure. That is a month with too little movable cash. If this is the first time money has sounded logical instead of judgmental, subscribe. The next fix needs to reach you before the next bad month does. And even when that share is not terrible, the month can still lose to the calendar. Rent, the car payment, and the card due date all land in the same stretch, and payday is still on the other side of the week. That is the calendar problem. You can have enough money across the month and still run short inside the month, because bills arrive in one pile and income arrives in another. A bill cluster gap is the days and dollars between your biggest wave of due dates and the paycheck that is supposed to refill the account. It's the hidden hole between a budget that looks fine on paper and a month that still feels tight. The dollar gap is bills due before the next paycheck minus the cash available that morning. If payday lands a few days later, those days have to be covered with existing cash, a credit card, borrowed money, an overdraft, or some bill getting pushed. That is why timing can beat totals. The monthly math can look acceptable while the path through the month still produces shortfalls. A payroll frequency study shows 48% of workers say they are paid every 2 weeks. That helps explain why bill timing can be a real problem, not a personal failure. A financial well-being survey found 31% of households say their income varies somewhat, or a lot from month to month. That means a stable annual salary can still produce an unstable month. This gets sharper with semi-monthly dates, bi-weekly cycles, partner timing, commissions, or bonuses. A household can do fine on paper and still keep hitting the same bad week. When money lands unevenly, the account needs room, not a lecture. The practical fix is boring and powerful. Move due dates when you can. Split large obligations across pay cycles when a provider allows it. And set bill money aside before the cluster week begins. If you cannot change the dates, the buffer has to cover the cluster because the calendar is not about to become fair on its own. Moving one due date by even a few days can remove a forced card swipe without changing your annual income at all. But there's a catch. The month can still break because due dates cluster in the wrong week. So why does one normal disruption still wreck the month even after timing gets cleaner? The registration notice or annual renewal pops up, and it feels like the month broke again. A lot of what people call emergencies are not emergencies. They are irregular expenses, which means real costs you can expect, just not every month. Irregular does not mean optional. Tires, deductibles, gifts, and annual bills still show up whether you planned for them or not. This is also where monthly affordability gets slippery. A seller often leads with a monthly number because it can feel easy. The true cash claim includes renewals, maintenance, repairs, and whatever the monthly pitch left out. That incentive is not neutral. The deal gets approved on the smooth monthly payment, while your future checking account inherits the lumpy parts nobody led with. A sinking fund is just money set aside bit by bit for one specific irregular expense. It's simply a reserved place so predictable non-monthly costs stop landing on top of your operating cash. The monthly sinking fund amount is the annual bill divided by the months in a year. You do not need a separate fund for every possible category on day one. Start with the costs that show up most often, or do the most damage when they hit with nothing set aside. Car repairs, medical bills, annual subscriptions, pet care, and home maintenance keep pretending to be surprises. That is why shame misses the point. Adult obligations often arrive on irregular timing, and they still count even when a budget app makes them look random. A household finance report shows only 63% of adults say they would cover a hypothetical $400 emergency expense with cash or its equivalent. That is a brutal way to define how thin the margin really is. One appliance repair or one deductible can look random when you did not save for it monthly, even though the category itself was never random. The bill did not come from nowhere. There was just no money set aside for it. But there's a catch. The bill that felt random was often predictable, just not monthly. When cash is thin, what gets the first saved dollar and what has to wait? Comment the one thing that grabs that dollar first for you. Debt, rent, the car, groceries, whatever keeps cutting the line. A little extra money lands, and 10 different priorities reach for it at once. That is where a lot of smart people stall out. Every goal sounds responsible, so the money gets sliced into polite little pieces and nothing becomes strong enough to change the month. Cash needs a job order. Without one, the next extra dollar gets spread across too many priorities and you stay just as fragile as before. Job 1 is the operating buffer. That is cash whose job is to cover normal timing gaps inside the month. Do not confuse the operating buffer with the emergency fund. The operating buffer handles normal timing friction. The emergency fund handles the things you did not reasonably expect. Job 2 is the next bills buffer. That is money set aside, so the next wave of required bills is already partly parked before the next paycheck lands. Job 3 is the true emergency reserve. That money is for shocks bigger than normal timing gaps and bigger than the irregular costs you should already be saving for on purpose. Buffer days tell you whether the buffer is real or just comforting language. Required daily spend is required monthly spend divided by the number of days in the month. Buffer days are cash reserved for required spending divided by that daily number. That single number tells you how long the month can stand with no new income. Even a modest operating buffer changes how money feels. Payday stops feeling like rescue and starts feeling like replenishment. That does not mean you wreck long-term progress out of panic. It means you stop a weak month from rating your future through card interest, late fees, overdrafts, and bad forced decisions in the present. Extra principal on a tidy debt plan can wait if the checking account keeps collapsing in the middle of the month. Optimization is not the same thing as stability. A useful rule is simple: stabilize the month first, then extend the runway, then deepen the reserve. But there's a catch. The first extra dollar needs one job first, or it gets spread across too many priorities. Splitting every extra dollar across debt, vacation, investing, general savings, and shopping at the same time usually creates 5 symbolic moves and 0 stability. One strong first move beats 5 nice intentions. A small account purpose map is enough for most people. One place parks upcoming bills, one holds specific sinking funds, and one protects the operating buffer. That order helps, but debt can still reach forward and flatten the buffer before it has time to do its job. The card autopay clears overnight, and the checking account suddenly looks far smaller. This is where pre-spent pay gets expensive. A revolving balance means some of today's paycheck is already attached to yesterday's life, and minimum payments make that attachment renew itself month after month. Minimums are tricky because they look responsible. They keep the account current, but they also keep the balance alive, preserve the monthly drag, and keep next month showing up already owing money. Autopay can hide the pain without solving the problem. The payment happens on time, but the checking account still loses room before the month has even begun. Short-term smoothing tools always charge something. Sometimes it is interest, sometimes it is a fee, sometimes it is lost flexibility, and sometimes it is just the habit of letting next month pay for this month. The grace period is the window that usually avoids purchase interest when the balance is paid in full by the due date. That condition matters a lot more than most people realize. But there's a catch. Once you carry a card balance, new purchases can start costing interest too. If the balance is revolving, the minimum and the interest mean part of next month's cash is already booked before you buy 1 gallon of gas. That is why the best debt target for this problem is not always the one that wins the prettiest spreadsheet contest. It is often the balance or payment pattern that most improves near-term survival by freeing monthly cash, stopping new purchase interest, or ending the card you keep using to finish the month. A consumer finance report found 49% of credit card holders revolved a balance. So for many people, the card is not just a payment tool anymore. It is part of the monthly survival plan, and it charges for that role. A daily use card with a carried balance is especially brutal because ordinary life starts dragging interest behind it. Once the card becomes part of normal cash flow, the next paycheck stays busy before it ever feels like income. One strong move here is to stop putting new spending on the balance that is already revolving, even if that means changing which payment rail handles everyday life for a while. The goal is to stop one leak before you try to perfect the whole system. So, why do raises disappear right when life is supposed to get easier? Your raise finally shows up, and within a couple of months, the account feels weirdly unchanged. More income helps, but only if it reaches your safety before it reaches your commitments. Many people do not blow the raise in one dramatic scene. They let it sponsor a slightly nicer version of the same life, and then the better paycheck becomes new overhead. But there's a catch. Raises usually upgrade your commitments before they upgrade your safety. Know someone whose raise keeps disappearing? Send them this video before the next bigger paycheck turns into new overhead. That is why raise capture needs to be a rule, not a hope. Every raise, bonus, refund, commission jump, or side income bump gets assigned before lifestyle upgrades get a vote. Treat the first bigger paycheck like a test, not permission. If the raise enters your life as extra, it will usually leave your life as recurring overhead. If take-home rises, decide in advance where the extra money goes before the first bigger paycheck lands. If the operating buffer is still weak, the first extra dollars go there until the month stabilizes. If the buffer exists but the card is still pulling cash out of next month, the next extra dollars go to the payment pattern or balance that reduces that drag. Only after the month is stable do you let more money become new recurring commitments. Lifestyle is not the enemy. Unplanned recurring lifestyle is. A Federal Reserve household survey found 37% saw monthly spending rise while only 32% saw monthly income rise. That is why a good salary can still feel like losing ground. This rule matters even more with lumpy money. Bonuses, commissions, tax refunds, and side income spikes feel like found money, which is exactly why they vanish unless you assign them before they arrive. A raise poured into a weak system usually disappears into old gaps, fresh subscriptions, slightly higher standards, and the same unresolved cash timing. The next question is which recurring costs deserve an automatic no, even when income rises. You scan the recurring charges, and the real weight is the stuff that renews whether you think about it or not. People can get distracted by the smallest category because it is easy to judge. The biggest relief usually comes from obligations that repeat and are hard to unwind. Do not rank bills by annoyance. Rank them by monthly drag, reversibility, and whether they create future obligations you will still be carrying when the mood that bought them is gone. Start with two blunt questions. How much does this cost me every month? And how hard is it to change soon? The first group to attack is the low-pain repeating stuff that drains cash without adding much value anymore. Stacked subscriptions, forgotten memberships, and recurring add-ons are often the fastest wins. The next group is the medium friction stuff that feels boring but matters. Insurance premiums, phone plans, internet tiers, and financed gadgets all deserve a fresh look. Then come the heavy hitters with slower timelines. Housing, vehicle decisions, childcare, commuting costs, and debt payments deserve the most attention because they shape the required spend share even when the fix takes longer than a week. A slow fix is still a fix, and one successful move in a large repeating cost can do more for your month than months of perfect behavior in the tiny categories. A cheaper recurring life beats a heroic month. You do not need to win every daily decision if the repeating decisions stop doing the damage. A recurring charge audit can be brutally simple. Pull your recent charges, circle every repeat, and rank each one by monthly drag and how fast it can be cut, downgraded, renegotiated, or replaced. Then make an order. Cancel the easy stuff, renegotiate the medium stuff, and put a real date on the hard stuff so it stops living as vague stress. This is also how you protect future raises. The bills that deserve an automatic no are the ones that create new monthly obligations before the old month is stable, especially when the upgrade looks small but renews forever. How do you make this survive a tired week when you do not want another system to babysit? Payday arrives and the money splits into jobs before it has time to turn into decisions. This is the low-effort system. It does not need to be impressive. It just needs to move money toward the right jobs before your mood, fatigue, or optimism gets involved. If your employer cannot split direct deposit, build the same behavior with scheduled transfers on the day pay arrives. The system matters more than the exact tool. One part is bill parking. Required bills for the next wave go to a separate place, so rent, insurance, minimums, and utilities stop competing with everyday swipes inside one checking account. Another part is reserves, sinking funds for predictable irregular costs, and the operating buffer. Each get their own space because general savings with no job usually gets used by whatever expense feels most urgent. Available to spend money should be the remainder after required bills and reserve transfers, not the full checking balance. The full balance is misleading when half of it already belongs to next week. That one distinction can change behavior fast. When the full checking balance stops getting treated as spendable money, random swipes are less likely to take money from bills you already meant to pay. Keep one short money review away from payday. Not a giant budget ritual. One calm check on a non-payday day to see what is already parked, what is due before the next income, and whether any irregular category needs a top-up. But there's a catch. None of this sticks until money moves automatically before you can change your mind. Automation is not about being virtuous. It is about removing the moment where tired you can turn planned money into available money and quietly rebuild the same problem. The proof that the fix is real is not a prettier spreadsheet. Bills are parked early, credit card reliance starts falling, and buffer days begin to rise even before income rises again. When buffer days rise, the month stops treating every delay like an emergency. When card reliance falls, your next paycheck stops arriving already committed to yesterday. A simple setup can be enough. Split direct deposit, so part goes to bill parking, part goes to reserves, and the rest stays available for current month variable spending. Then schedule one transfer after payday and one non-payday review to keep the whole thing honest. That is what progress looks like before a bigger income ever shows up. The month will keep trying to spend your pay early, and the system has to move first every single time. Then payday starts feeling like income instead of relief.